Have you ever stopped to think that everything you've been taught about the world might be incomplete? No, this isn't a conspiracy theory, it's real geography, with a heavy dose of curiosities that will turn your mental map upside down. Forget what you think you know about big countries, cold places, or religious populations. Believe me, the planet is a puzzle that's much more surprising than what you were told in school. And the best part? You'll realize it in a few minutes. Here, each fact is a door that opens, and behind it there's always something unexpected. There's a tiny country with a coastline longer than France. There's the purest air in the world coming from a forgotten tip of Australia. There's a river that crosses ice and a sea without a coastline. It's the kind of knowledge that, when you absorb it, changes the way you see news, travel, economics, and even politics. And you don't need to be an expert to understand. You just need to be thirsty for discovery and willing to see the invisible. If you like videos that really teach you something new, not just to play with your family group, but to use in your everyday life, then stay with me. Because in the next few minutes, you'll understand why learning these curiosities isn't just fun, it's transformative. And when you're done, you'll realize that you'll never look at a map the same way again. It's hard to imagine the vastness of the world until we start playing with numbers and comparisons. Just think, there are regions where the temperature is so high that you can fry an egg on the asphalt, and others where water freezes in the air before touching the ground. Global geography is like a huge patchwork quilt, full of extreme cuts, insane contrasts, and, of course, infinite curiosities. Every little piece of the planet holds a detail that few notice, but that changes everything. Understanding this is like looking at the world map with a magnifying glass. What was once flat now has depth. An example that few people know about are places that seem invisible on traditional maps, but hide global records. The city of Norilsk in Russia, for example, is one of the most polluted and coldest at the same time, and almost no one talks about it. At the same time, you have islands like Kiribati, which are already moving due to rising sea levels. These geographical curiosities are not just cool information for chatting at the bar. They show how the world is constantly changing, even when we're not looking. And when we dive into data from reliable sources, not generated by AI, the impact is different. It feels like we're discovering treasures buried in everyday life. Knowing that the Atacama Desert has areas where it hasn't rained in centuries, or that there's a city where the sun doesn't set for 2 months, changes our sense of normality. That's why, by exploring curiosities like these, we prepare ourselves for the next level of knowledge. Understanding not only where countries are on the map, but what their sizes say about the world. When we talk about large countries, it is almost automatic to think of Russia or Canada. But the geographical world does not live only in extremes. The average size of the 195 countries is 715,900 square kilometers, and the closest to that are two names that rarely share the same paragraph: North Korea and Malawi. This curiosity alone makes us realize how surprising the concept of average can be. After all, who would have imagined that two nations so different in culture, climate, and politics would have such similar dimensions? And if you think that giants are always the same, remember this: Western Australia, alone, is larger than Alaska and Texas combined. That's right, and we are talking about only a fraction of Australia. These details show how size can often be deceiving. A small country in terms of size can have an absurd population density, while a giant one can be home to deserts where no one lives. These curiosities teach us to look at maps with different eyes, as if they were pieces of a multi-layered puzzle. To apply this perspective to your everyday life, try exploring interactive maps like The True Size Of, where you can drag countries and compare them to others at real scale. It's a simple, educational, and addictive tool. Plus, understanding these proportions can even change your perception of the economy, international politics, and even the environment. But if there's one thing it really changes, it's the way you'll see the next piece of geographic data. Imagine walking into a room with 100 people from all over the world. Their average age would be 30. Not too young, not too old, but that number hides a world of curiosities. In Japan, for example, the average jumps to 49, revealing an older population. In Niger, however, that average drops to just 15. It's as if for every adult there is an army of children in training. These demographic data are like mirrors that show the soul of a nation, its priorities, its challenges, and the future that lies on the horizon. In countries with young populations, the focus tends to be on education, job creation, and family structure. These are places where schools are overcrowded and where public policies need to race against time to keep up with growth. In older countries, such as Italy and Germany, however, the challenge is different: retirement, health, and the shrinking workforce. These interesting facts help us understand why some advanced economies are encouraging young people to immigrate, and why others are investing heavily in technology to fill labor shortages. And why does this matter to you? Because knowing the average age of a population can give you a clue about where to invest, study, or even migrate. A young country might be a promising place for startups focused on education or leisure. An older country, on the other hand, might be the ideal place to start a business in the health or wellness sector. This kind of demographic analysis turns a simple number into a strategic key. And speaking of strategy, how about getting to know a tiny country that hides one of the longest coastlines in the world? When we talk about countries with extensive coastlines, Brazil, Australia, and perhaps even Norway come to mind. However, among the most underrated curiosities in world geography, there is a group of islands that goes unnoticed: Micronesia. Despite its small territorial extension, it has an absurdly long coastline, larger than that of countries like Argentina or France. It seems strange, doesn't it? But think about it. Dozens of islands scattered across the Pacific form kilometers and kilometers of coastline. It's a classic case of don't judge a country by its position on the map. This type of fragmented coastline brings advantages and challenges. On the one hand, there is an abundance of marine resources and tourism opportunities. On the other hand, maintaining the sovereignty and infrastructure of so many scattered islands requires much more than good intentions. It requires logistics, investment, and cultural resilience. It is one of those curiosities that show how nature plays unexpected cards. And, of course, it also teaches us to look beyond the obvious when we talk about territorial wealth. By the way, have you ever noticed how countries with extensive coastlines tend to develop an almost intimate relationship with the sea? From commerce to spirituality, from cuisine to climate, everything changes. And you can experience this firsthand. Try visiting a traditional coastal community and observe their customs, from the way they cook to the way they relate to time. These are experiences that show how the coast shapes identity. And while we're on the subject of identity, how about understanding how faith also shapes the contours of a nation? When we look at a world map, we see political borders. But if we use spiritual lenses, we see other contours, those of faith. South Asia is a true religious mosaic, and one of its greatest curiosities is that the majority of Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs from around the world are concentrated in this region. It is a cultural melting pot where temples, mosques, and gurudwaras coexist side by side, often on the same street. The spiritual density per square kilometer is impressive and directly influences customs, food, clothing, and even national holidays. Countries such as India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh are not only home to the largest populations of these religions, but are also the stage for ancient traditions. Hindu rituals on the banks of the Ganges, calls to prayer in Lahore, or Sikh pilgrimages in Amritsar are events that define daily life. These curiosities are not just tourist attractions. They reveal the power of collective spirituality to shape entire societies. Furthermore, they show how belief systems influence political and economic decisions and even geopolitical conflicts. Understanding these dynamics can be useful for much more than just curiosity. For those who work in international trade, for example, knowing when Ramadan or Diwali occur can be decisive in closing or losing a deal. For travelers, respecting local cultural codes makes all the difference. Studying religion, in this case, is almost like a social compass. And if we are talking about the environment, culture, and respect, then it is worth taking a deep breath, literally, and heading to one of the places with the purest air on Earth. In a world where air quality is increasingly compromised, knowing that there is still a place where you can breathe purity is one of those curiosities that warms the heart and the lungs. That place is Cape Grim, in Tasmania, an isolated spot in southern Australia where the wind blows directly from Antarctica, with no obstacles in its path. The result? Some of the cleanest and purest air on the planet, studied by scientists for decades. Breathing there is almost like traveling back in time, a reminder of what was once common all over the world. It is no wonder that this piece of land has become a reference in research on climate change and atmospheric composition. At Cape Grim, the first changes in CO2 and methane levels of the modern era were detected. In other words, in addition to being a paradisiacal setting, the place is a natural laboratory. These curiosities show how geography, science, and the environment are deeply connected, and how some places, no matter how isolated they may be, have played a central role in the history of humanity. And if you can't travel to Tasmania tomorrow, you can apply this learning to your everyday life. Reducing your use of fossil fuels, avoiding highly polluting products, and supporting environmental policies can all make a difference. After all, every choice we make helps determine whether the air of the future will be breathable or not. And speaking of nature in its raw state, there's a colossal river that almost no one mentions and a sea that, well, doesn't even have a coastline. When it comes to great rivers, the Nile and the Amazon dominate the conversation. But the Yenisei River in Siberia is one of those silent giants that goes unnoticed. It is the fifth largest in the world and, unlike most, flows into the icy Arctic Ocean. Imagine the power of a river that cuts through one of the most inhospitable regions on the planet and yet sustains cities, cultures, and biodiversity along its course. These are the curiosities that remind us that not everything that is important is worth it. And while rivers have their silent glory, seas also hold their mysteries. The Sargasso Sea, for example, is the only sea in the world without a landlock. It is located in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, surrounded by ocean currents instead of dry land. Within it floats a thick mass of algae called sargassum, hence the name. This ghost sea, as some call it, is the home and nursery of several marine species. A true geographical anomaly that presents us with a multitude of ecological curiosities. These hidden scenarios make us reflect on how much we still have to discover. Even with satellites, digital maps, and drones, the planet holds secrets that defy our common sense. And do you know what's most fascinating? Every forgotten river and every ignored sea holds clues about the Earth's past and the future of the climate. And that's where the big change lies. When we realize that, to understand the world, we don't just need to look at the obvious, we just need to be willing to see the invisible. Now that you've seen the world through different eyes, tell me, how many of these interesting facts did you already know? And more importantly, how many of them have changed the way you think? The truth is that knowledge isn't just for impressing others. It's a key that opens doors to new opportunities, new conversations, and new decisions. Knowing where the cleanest air is, how countries compare to each other, or why the average age of a nation matters. All of these things can change everything from your travels to the way you consume news. So, which of these discoveries gave you this insight? Which made you think, wow, I really didn't know that? Comment below. I want to know what surprised you the most. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden gears of our planet, get ready. There's still a lot more to come. Because the more we learn, the more we realize how many incredible things there are still to be discovered. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and come with me on this journey. Because the world is a treasure chest full of interesting facts, and here's the key.